In this video tutorial, we're going to look at Spring MVC with thymeleaf. Thymeleaf is a popular Vue technology. So this is an alternative for JSP, and it's also very popular, and it's a template technology unlike JSPs, where JSPs are essentially converted to servlets, and servlets will be doing .out.println to send the HTML response message back to the browser. So Spring MVC, as I have already mentioned, loosely couples the controller with the Vue technology. So you can use your own Vue resolver, and in this, instead of using output.jsp or login.jsp, whatever, we are going to use something like login.html. So it's basically HTML based Vue technology, the thymeleaf, and in the HTML code you will embed some expressions to get the dynamic value. So for example, you can store some values in the model, and then through those thymeleaf expressions you can go and pull those values. So basically how it's going to work is a request will come through, go to the front controller, and then handler mapping will map to the respective controller, and then controller will store some value into the model, and then it'll come back to the dispatcher servlet, and dispatcher servlet would have already been configured with a Vue thymeleaf as the Vue resolver, and then the thymeleaf will have output.html code that will have some expressions to go and fetch the model values. It'll go and look at the model value, and then this step won't be there. This is only for the JSPs, and then the converted HTML. So the dynamic values will be automatically substituted, and the HTML will be pushed to the client browser. So let's look at that. The first step, like anything else, is in the pom.xml file. We need to add the thymeleaf library dependencies. So if I double click on this, so we already looked at we got JUnit, we got Servlet API, we got Spring MVC, and in addition to that, so now we have removed the JSTL dependency, because JSTL is mainly for JSP. JSTL stands for Java Server Tag Library, so that's no longer required, so that's removed. We still need the Spring MVC, Web MVC, and now we have added the org.thymeleaf, the thymeleaf Spring 4. So you can also have Spring 5 version and Spring 3 and so on, but I think the Spring 5 version is still the milestone version, so we're going to use Spring 4. So if you want to see how this works, if I copy the group ID, and if I go to the search.maven.org, if I say G for group and paste this thymeleaf, then I search org.thymeleaf as a group ID. Here are the dependencies. You can see thymeleaf Spring 4, which is a 3.06 releases. There are quite a few other releases as well, so that's where we're going to use it here, 3.06. And now if you go to the code, and I want to use that, and you go into the Maven dependencies, the thymeleaf Spring 4 is going to bring in thymeleaf 3.06. This is a recursive dependency because thymeleaf Spring 4 requires thymeleaf and other dependencies, whatever it requires based on thymeleaf Spring 4's pom.xml file. Whatever dependencies it stipulates is going to recursively bring that in as well. So all these 4 dependencies that we have declared has recursively gone and brought in a lot of other dependencies based on the pom.xml file in their respective artifacts. So once you have defined the pom.xml file to bring in the thymeleaf, the next step we're going to look at is the controller is going to slightly change. No, the controller is going to be the same. So the controller is going to be the same because we don't here say login.jsp or anything like that. We say just login, and also we say login success. So all you have to do is now create login.html and login success.html. We look at, yeah. So let's go to now the view area. So inside, if we go into web content, webinf, this is a private folder. So inside the web views folder, I have already renamed. So all you have to do is right click on it, refactor, and then rename. So I have gone in and right clicked on the login.html or login.jsp, refactor, rename, and rename it to login.html. And also the code would significantly change as well. You won't have any JSP declarations at the top. Instead of that, you will have the XML namespace with th being the prefix, and we put in http://www.thymeleaf.org, and then you can see most of the code is basically HTML with thymeleaf expressions. So let's look at what are the thymeleaf expressions. So this is saying a form, and the form method we are going to use is a post, and then there are a number of special symbols that we use in thymeleaf. So for example, dollar we use to get in a bean, so a backing model bean. So we are going to say login form is the name of the bean. So for example, if you look at that in the controller, so if I go to login controller here, so when this comes in, when the request comes in, I'm going to store my model, which is the empty login, with a name of login form. So the same name login form is going to be used in the login.html file as $login form. So that means look at this beam for the model. And then you use an @ symbol to represent URIs, Unified Resource Identifier. So you can specify absolute URI. So in this case, there will be localhost :8080. So it will start from HTTP, which is the protocol, /localhost :8080, and then the web context, which is simple web /entry /login. But it is not a good practice. Say if you have hundreds of HTML views, login HTML views, and then if somehow you change your server or whatever, you need to go and modify your absolute URL because your host has changed or the port has changed or whatever, which is quite cumbersome. You can do regex, replace, and things like that, find and replace, but it's not a good practice. So what you need to do is you need to specify relative URL, so relative to the web context. In our case, the web context is all the way up from localhost 8080 /simple web. So this is the web context. So everything relative to that. So if you start on here, relative to that is the entry. So entry is where the dispatcher servlet is mapped to. So anything /entry will go to the Spring dispatcher servlet, and then /login. So login is what our controller is being configured for. So if you look at the controller here, it will take login here. So this is where the form submit will come in. So /login. So for the URI you use @ symbol, and for the bean variables you use $. So this is where the model is. And inside that we have the user ID, which is the label, all these are HTML, password, which is the label. Again, we got a th prefix. There's a th here, which is a prefix, the namespace prefix for thymeleaf. And then we say th field. And if you want to see all the fields inside a particular form, you can use an asterisk. So basically it means login form, which is nothing but the login.java. So inside login.java, if I press function control F3, just F3, you will see we got user ID and user password. So inside a bean, we can access the fields user ID and password with the asterisk here. So asterisk user ID and asterisk user password. If you don't want to use asterisk, you can also use $, but you need to say $login form dot user ID or $login form dot user password. If you don't want to just prefix it with login form, but you know that's the bean and I want to access the fields inside, then you use an asterisk here. So that's basically the login.html. And now let's look at the login success.html, which is even simpler. Same way we define the namespace, th is the prefix, and we got basically an HTML, and we do a th text output, and we are using a dollar here. You can see logged in user. So logged in user is the name the model has been saved with. So you can look at it here. If I go to the controller, see, we saving it with the name of logged in user. See the model.add attribute login user, and passing the login object, which will have the user ID and the password, and we are just retrieving it, login user dot user ID. So as I have mentioned before, so you have setting the values here, the model, through the controller, and then you're using the thymeleaf expressions to retrieve those values and push out the HTML directly. So that converted servlet is no more longer required for thymeleaf, and this 9 arrow will go straight out to the browser as an HTML. So now we have looked at the HTML. Now we have looked at the controller. The only change I had to make was it wasn't happy with login hyphen form, so I had to use login form as a name. So just about it. And now let's look at how to wire it up. So before we used a view resolver through Java config to wire up the JS piece. It is a little bit more involved in wiring up thymeleaf, but if you were to write thymeleaf based Spring MVC, you will be using Spring Boot, which makes it much easier. I'm using Spring MVC, and Spring Boot, we'll look at it in another tutorial. You can specify the starter dependency and automatically things will get wired up for you. But in this case, let's look at the config, and it's in the simple web configuration where the view resolver is wired up. So this is all same as for the JSP. So at configuration will tell you this is a configuration class. Enable web MVC is the annotation base, so we're going to enable the model view controller, and component scan is to scan all our servlets. And then if you go in here, this is the view resolver. So here also we can see every servlet will have servlet config and the application context. So your web itself will have a web context. So if you provide application context, app context, and do auto wired, Spring will automatically inject the application context into this variable. So Spring will take care of that injection. All you have to do is annotate it as @auto wired. Now when we do view resolver, so this is how Spring will invoke this. So that's part of this view resolver here. So you define the view resolver and you tell what view resolver to use. So Spring will automatically invoke the view resolver method. And then see here we're instantiating thymeleaf view resolver. This is why we needed to bring in the thymeleaf dependency. And we are resolver, we are setting a template engine. So this is calling a method called template engine here. Then this goes to this template engine. We have to set up the template engine, and then template engine calls a template resolver. So in the template resolver is where we are using this application context. So this automatically get injected by Spring because it's auto wired. And then we say where the prefix is. So this is where all of our HTML pages are going to be stored, which is under webinf views. So you can see here it's under source main web app webinf views. So webinf views is where the .html files are. So we need to specify that. And I go back into the controller, and then it's asking you what type of template mode it is. So template mode is HTML. So this it supports different modes. So basically you can see what modes they are. For if I go and this thing and say dot, and should come up. So you got CSS mode, HTML, HTML5, JavaScript. This is where the thymeleaf is very powerful. So you can use JavaScript, HTML5, raw text, XHTML, and so on. So in this case, I'll leave it as HTML. In the later tutorials, we look at using AngularJS with Spring MVC. So then we might change the mode. And then resolver suffix is set .html because our files we are calling it .html. So if you're going to use XHTML, then we can say log.xhtml and so on. So that's all is required to wire up the thymeleaf view resolver. and I don't think anything is required on the Spring Web App Initializer. Will be same as before, so anything with entry / is going to go to the thymeleaf. It's going to go to that controller, and then the controller will look at the configuration on the, not the controller, the dispatcher servlet will look at the web configuration and bootstrap the thymeleaf as a view resolver. So now this is all done, so all you have to do is build, deploy, and then run it. So to build it, we go right click on simple web, run as maven install, so which will create inside the target folder. So it will create a simple web war. So I'm going to copy the war file, and then I'm going to go into maven folder into web apps and paste it. Replace the existing war file, web archive file, and then I'm going to go to a DOS prompt, and I'm already in the Tomcat bin folder. So all you have to do is startup.bat, and Tomcat is going to start with a simple web war. I would keep an eye out to see if there are any errors popping up. So no errors. Then I go into open a client browser window. So initially it's going to be localhost 8080 simple web, and entry is where the entry point is. So you can see that that's in the simple login controller. Anything with / entry is going to come in here, and it's going to show a simple login.html page with empty login object model, where we will be capturing the entered values into this login object, and it is stored with the name of login form. So if I go here and press enter, I should be getting the form. So this is the login.html page, and whatever I type in, so username, say test user, and password is also a test. Then if I press go, this HTML login.html page is going to post a request to entry login, and then it is going to pass whatever the values it captures here, that whatever we have entered through the input, into this login form object, which is the login.java class, and then it's going to capture it via the user ID and user password fields. So if I say go, and it's going to come up with a test. So what it's basically doing here is simple login controller goes in here, and automatically that get captured via the login here, login object. So that's where we're getting captured from this form object, and then it'll be going into the controller via the login object, and when you do a print output line, it says login.getUserID. So you can see it here, show form and user is test. Here show form and user is test. So that's what it's getting printed from this line. This is also another way to debug. If something is not working correctly, you can put a system.out.println method, but which is not recommended. You need to make sure that you remove the system.out.println. Industrial production level code should not have any system.out.println, but you can use a logger framework and do logger.info or whatever. And then we are passing that whatever the user ID that we captured, which is test, into the model again with the name of logged in user, and then login successful will display that login user.user ID, and that's what we're getting this output here. And everything that we have covered here, you can see a link below that takes you through step by step as to what we did. Thank you, and we will see it in another tutorial.